technology. We are here recording with our friend Bishop Will Williman. Uh, Will and I both have a project that we will not go into detail about for fear of ruining the surprise. But we are here to talk about the writing and preaching of Fleming Rutledge. And so, Will, welcome.
Hey, Jason. Great to be with you. Um, Aristotle said that good friends love the same things in the same way, and
Hmm.
that's kind of at the heart of friendship. And if that be true, we're really good friends because both of us adore Fleming Rutledge, and uh, it's so what a great thing that brings us all together.
And Tier.
I'm just here to make sure that your bromance remains compatible with the old Book of Discipline. That's
Yeah.
But
My
talk a little.
relationship with Fleming is age appropriate. Jason's is a little bit, yeah, okay.
Well, I don't need that medication just yet.
Oh my god.
Yeah, maternal.
So
Maternal.
Tier,
yes.
share a little bit about your affection for Fleming.
Gosh, so I started reading Fleming's work as I was becoming a preacher for beginning my time as a pastor, and so my preaching has been heavily informed by two people. We'll call it three because primarily Will and Fleming, and we'll throw Jason in there because he's on this call and I don't want him to feel left out. And what I have always appreciated about Fleming's preaching is that she gets to the point quickly, but in a way that sometimes you don't realize she's getting to the point, right? She keeps the main thing. She keeps Jesus as the main thing, his death, his resurrection, the main thing in all of her preaching, but does it in a way that just continually pulls you in. You often don't realize it's happening until you're getting smacked in the face with the good news of the gospel. I say that I've only ever sent her sermons to read twice. And her response to that was, "You're brave. And oh, by the way, here's how you could do both of these, better." And I took that as her being very gracious with her time and very gentle with me as a student of preaching, but then also saying, you need to work on this a little bit more before you ever send it back to me again.
I mean, speaking of Myrtle, your sixth grade English teacher, Will, Fleming is merciless when it comes to fixing grammar and misspellings.
Yeah, wonderful. She really is. She is praised by many for the kind of elegance. That's not exactly the right word, but of her language, her, I'd say, careful use of language without being showy, or it's just beautiful. She went to Sweetbriar College in Virginia, which in my memory was always known for being a first-rate women's college, but one that stressed English and literature. And I've always wondered about her, if her college background, but she's somebody who's been very well formed in the English language. That is notable. But I agree with Tier that she does keep the main thing, and the main thing is always the God who has met us in Jesus Christ, the Trinity. And gosh, particularly as a Methodist, Fleming first got my attention accusing contemporary sermons of being anthropocentric, being mostly about us rather than theocentric. And wow, you can go through, as I've done recently, I went through her book of sermons Undoing Death or Death Undone. Maybe that was the title of it. Then I went through her God Spoke to Abraham sermons. And then I went through this wonderful book of meditations that was collected from her sermons and writing. And it's all about God.
Mhm.
And she may start with an interesting thing she read in the New Yorker, the New York Times. That's the way Episcopalians, that's what they read. And but she's always right back there with God, and it's always that that talk about God is privileged in all
Mhm.
of her sermons, and she really shows how the difference being theocentric makes.
So, Will, I don't know that I know how you first came upon Fleming and her work. What's the origin story there?
I had read her, and then one of my things at Duke Chapel was to invite guest preachers, distinguished preachers like Tony Robinson, and the and I think from that I invited her, and I remember I sent my associate out to pick her up at the airport, and Greg Coker, who is now
Mhm.
the chaplain at University of Richmond, and Craig came back. He was only a couple of years out of seminary. He came back and he said, "Wow, wow." He said, Okay, first thing is, it turns out Fleming is a woman." And and I said, "Oh, you're showing that you know nothing about Virginia or South Carolina names." And he said, "She gets off the plane," and he claims that she was wearing riding habit. She was in a red coat and black riding pants and boots. And he said, everybody sort of got off and I wandered around and I had this picture of her. But I walked up and said, "Are you Dr. Rutledge?" And she says, "I am. And who are you?" And anyway, he just said, "Wow, that's a lot of woman. That's a lot of preacher. That's a lot of wow." And so anyway, that was my and so I on Sunday morning she preached this wonderful sermon, and again, I must say that that sermon and so many others that I have read or listened to from Fleming, I often think, wow, I am a really simple, thin preacher. I don't expect that much out of my congregations. And with Fleming, there's always that sense about we are gathered here for some very important business. Now, I may make some funny comments, some cute comments along the way, but let's get busy. This is going to be serious, and it
Tony,
could take more than 15 minutes.
what about you, Tony?
Um, I first read something by Fleming in the journal Kata Legete, the Journal of the Southern Christian Churchman or something like that.
Will Campbell.
Mhm.
That was probably in the early 80s. And the article I read, I don't still have it, but it was a critique of Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza's some work in which and she taught union when I was there. She was rearranged did, so I'd heard her, knew her, read her, and Fleming sort of dismantled her on the basis of human experience is not the basis of determining the Word of God.
Hmm.
And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. I Congregationalist, UCC. I thought it was all about our human experience, and but she really said something in there that got a hold of me. So I continued to kind of follow her work, and we actually met when we were both teaching at one of the different schools in the Toronto School of Theology about 20 years ago, and became good friends then at that time, uh, and have been in touch ever since. And yeah, but I've learned a lot from her. It sounded like when I tuned in, you guys maybe were talking about what I was going to observe, which is that her sermons read well,
Hmm.
which most of us try to publish our sermons, but they don't. They don't. They don't make that transition that well. But hers do, and some of it has to do with her felicity with the English language. She doesn't mind when I send her something. It may have already been published, but she'll correct it. Uh, and she's always right, of course. Um, yeah, so that's some of it, and some of it is that, as Will said, her things she draws on are quite erudite, and so it makes you feel like you're having a conversation with a combination really good English scholar and theologian. So her sermons are readable in a way that mine certainly are not.
Well, you mentioned her Virginia name. And so the two of you are about the same age. You're both from the South. I'm wondering what resonances you find in her work with yours, and where the two of you might depart.
Well, that
You
was another
know,
thing, is that
uh,
oh, go ahead, Will.
oh, you know, for the reasons Tony mentioned, where Fleming from the beginning has had this wonderful Bardian. I don't know how much she's indebted to Bart. Doesn't refer to him very often, but has this Bardian suspicion of experience, and knows that experience is not enough to base a theology upon, a sermon upon, a life upon. However, I have wondered just how much she grew up in the South, a segregated, legally segregated South, and she was she went to a Southern women's college in Virginia, was a Southern Episcopalian in Virginia, South Carolina, and in her sermons, she does refer to, for instance, King's letter from Birmingham jail, or King's preaching appears to have affected her greatly. And also, she was affected greatly by the civil rights movement that she refers to from time to time when she was a student at Union Seminary. That was in full swing. And I've noticed when she's looking for a kind of positive church preacher illustration, she often goes to the black church, and it will be a black church in the South that she says this person is a model for her, or is an exemplar of how it ought to be done. So, and then the Vietnam War she mentions, and I'm wondering if I'm projecting my own stuff into this, or whether this is Fleming. However, I believe that it's very important for people Fleming and my age who grew up in the South. Growing up in the South means a great deal. Flannery O'Connor once said, you know, people from the North are not from anywhere. If you're from South Carolina in the 1960s, 50s, you're from somewhere. And the way I say it is, you know, we were the generation whose parents lied to us. They lied to us about Vietnam. They lied to us about civil rights. And I believe that being from the civil rights Vietnam generation explains a lot. I think had we the time or the interest, I could explain, Donald Trump. A lot. Donald Trump is my age, or I'm the age of Donald Trump, and so is Bill Clinton, our age. What does that tell you? Well, I think it says that those years were formative upon us, and just about everybody my age, for instance, is deeply suspicious of the government as the solution to anything. Now we fall down on the left or the right in that suspicion, but still there's that suspicion. Also, and Fleming, I believe, would agree with this, and that is, you notice in her sermons and all, when she wants to talk about sin and the human depravity and the originality of our sin, our origination, she thinks about race. And I have had to learn over the years that I really think race is kind of at the bottom of everything that Americans talk about, and that the lies surrounding race are just explain a lot about our sinfulness. Tony and I have talked about this from time to time, and he marvels that I'm a Southerner and is grateful that he's not. Anyway, with Fleming, I just think the fact that her origins explain a lot about Fleming. And one thing I've had to notice in my own theology, I don't seem to give any credence whatsoever to human potential. I seem to have so little faith that we're going to eventually, if we can just get the right people elected, we're going to get it all together. I don't believe that. Fleming doesn't believe that. And I kind of wonder if that is attributable to the fact that we grew up Southern.
I'm wondering, Will, maybe it's more pronounced in her sermons than yours, but it's definitely in your preaching. This Pauline emphasis on not only Christ dying for the ungodly, but the idea of sin and evil being something that runs through the heart of every individual. I'm wondering that both of you highlight that frequently. Is that attributable, or do you resonate with that part of Scripture because you did grow up with
Romans 5 and 6?
that Fleming has written about. That she was converted by Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" sermon. That she was called out of the racism that she grew up with, and then had to reckon with people in her own life and family that she loved, but who were caught up in that sin. And so I'm wondering if these are aspects of the gospel that both of you have gravitated towards because of the context in which you grew up.
Yes.
I'm not a bred Southerner like Will. I grew up in Arlington.
He always says that with a sense of pride, but
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm an Oregonian, and it turns out that Oregon has a terrible record on race. That was not known until fairly recently, but I think there was a law that Black people couldn't even come to Oregon, and that maybe up into the 20s or something. And then there was a big resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan in Oregon. So I got no basis for pride, but I did grow up in Arlington, near where you guys are. As I've told you, Tier went to dances at your church as a high school kid. And I do think Fleming articulated it for me, but it seems to be a sensibility I had that sin was more than just the acts, individual acts. It's more than sin, plural sins. It's a condition in which we find ourselves, and I do think that may be a inheritance for those who have grown up with the segregated south, which Arlington was segregated when I was quite small. I remember when the schools were integrated. I was in 8th grade, I think, and there was anyhow. And Fleming, I believe this is correct. I'm not entirely sure, but I think her father was in the legislature in Richmond, and that he
Part of the
would have
bird
been
machine.
What?
He's part of the bird machine.
Well, I was just going to say that. And the very first thing that I ever published at age 10 was a letter to the editor of the Northern Virginia Sun excoriating the bird machine.
Oh, wow.
And that just came from listening to my parents' dinner table conversation, of course. But it was interesting that we had that in common too. They were seen at that time as the big block of enforcing segregation in Virginia.
I remember my first rural church in Virginia. I was invited to go to the local Democratic Party meeting, and so I didn't know how to say no, and so I did, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, these are the most racist people I've ever been around." and it took me like, "Oh, this is like the old Democratic Party in the South."
Yeah, I was. My parents were from Oregon, and they were liberals, and my dad worked for the federal government, and we went to a congregational church. It was quite liberal, and was even involved in picketing theaters because they were segregated seating there in Arlington, and that church, probably one of the best things they did for me was take me to black churches in DC. And I remember when our church camps, our summer camps were integrated, and people, a lot of local got very upset by that, but it was, so I was kind of in, but not of that world. I didn't encounter that many, I was kind of a little bit sheltered from it.
I remember.
I know Fleming, we must never forget that her lifetime big book, her big work was The Only Atonement. And as you said, she talked about being converted with Martin Luther King, and I said, an Episcopalian born again. What is that? Something, when you're the richest people in town and you're running the banks and all, you don't really need to be born again. Or as Flannery O'Connor put it, any man with a good car don't need redemption. Yeah, she talks about it, and I'm just really believe that. And I thought of the book Atonement. Someone has said, she's really convinced of human degradation. I think that's kind of unfair. I think she's really convinced Jesus Christ saves sinners. Period.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only people he saves are sinners. And but she really believes we need saving. I know as a college chaplain, there were those moments when some student would be pouring out his heart to me and saying, I can't believe I did that. I'll never be able to live with myself. I can't believe I was that bad. I went to the best prep school in Minneapolis and said, now we were both drunk, but still, I just can't believe I lowered myself to do that. I would say in a pastoral way, well, here's where I thank God I'm from South Carolina, because I would have done something like that at 19. I never had the opportunity you had, but I would have taken it, I feel sure, at 19. And he said, you can't mean that. You can't. And I said, yeah. I said, in South Carolina, we believe a lot of stupid stuff, but we never believe we're good. and we our parents were bad and our grandparents are worse than they were. And that becomes a kind of gift when confronted with American naivete, idealism, etc. I had a student do a wonderful paper on why Episcopalians never preach on redemption. And he took sermons by Barbara Brown Taylor and sermons by Sam Wells and some other wonderful Anglican Episcopal preachers, and notice never 1 ounce of atonement, redemption, anything. It's I'm preaching to you in order to kind of improve you.
Isn't it?
And,
I
and
think
all.
it's either you or Stanley. I heard make a joke about how when Episcopalians talk about the incarnation, they mean, God put on flesh and was like, oh, I kind of like this.
These people are good people. I'd like to be one of them. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I
So-
think
Fleming, it just makes Fleming all the more amazing. She is down deep, way down deep Anglican, and loves the Book of Common Prayer, the 1928, loves the King James, loves the liturgy beautifully, and yet she really is part of that tradition of saying, we do not contribute to our salvation.
Mhm. What were you going to say, Tony?
yeah, just I guess amplifying that point. And again, one of the things Fleming has pointed me to is the active agency of God. Will was mentioning that earlier. And she just hammers human potential, and the idea. I wrote a thing for Easter this year called Easter is Not a Human Potential Story, which, is basically right out of Fleming. But liberals, in my experience, the folk that I'm from and no, we don't basically think we're sinners.
Mhm.
We don't basically think we need to be saved. We need some advice. We need a little improvement, encouragement, maybe to feel better about ourselves. But that's about it, and that's a real divide in the church. And she's unrelenting on that. She doesn't play nice in the sense of just pulling punches.
She has a wonderful kind of early sermon in her collection, The Undoing of Death, and she starts out about hope, about we want hope, we need hope, and then she goes through and demolishes examples of hope, hoping in government, hoping in our better angels, and hoping in people and all, and just sort of demolishes each one of these. And she seems to take particular delight, like Flannery O'Connor did, in taking good, well-meaning, liberal people and showing how they do damage and all. And she ends kind of the sermon by saying, so let's stop playing, with hoping in us. We are getting ready to witness God at work. If God is not at work for us and our salvation this weekend, it was a Holy Week sermon, there is no hope. Thank you. And it just, I'm paraphrasing, but more eloquent than that. But yeah, I think that is so deeply un-American, un-Methodist, and I found her sermons deeply challenging to the kind of self-help, anthropocentric, Pelagian preaching that abounds in my church family.
There's a young preacher near my church now. For some reason, he asked me for advice on how to preach an Easter sermon. It was his first time preaching Easter, and I referred him to that book, Will, to the Undoing of Death. I was like,
oh, really?
I told him, like, it's all of Holy Week. You should read
Yeah.
the whole thing because the whole thing informs Easter. But if you have to, just read the Easter sermons. And his response back to me was, she really believes that the resurrection actually happened. And I was like, oh my God, like that's the lynch, like that's it. We're all
Yeah.
You're supposed to believe that.
Because Fleming, somewhere Fleming tells the story of being a young wife and possibly mother, and going to see Karl Barth speak at Union Seminary in Richmond
Oh.
when he was doing his visit in the
Mhm.
States, and how she was horrified by this is before she was in the ordination process, and she was horrified to hear the clergy who attended there themselves kind of horrified that Bart really seemed to believe the things that he was saying, and that kind of sophisticated ridicule of Bart's kind of naive faith um, really shocked her.
Hmm.
And so partly I wonder, like I wonder if some of the strength of her preaching and conviction is that she didn't go immediately from university to seminary, that she had time
That's interesting.
as a committed layperson and listener to sermons first.
Yeah. I think, yeah, she was. I know very little about those years, or her as a young mother, and the years after college, and all. And at Union Seminary, evidently Lou Martin was a huge influence on her. Uh, and she, in the book, that book of meditations, uh, is one of the few places I know where she has reflected on her preaching, and reflects for about 10 pages. And in there, she says that at Union, one of the best things she got was you didn't do biblical work, exegesis and all, and then do theology. You did theology and exegesis together. And that sometimes the theology preceded your reading and then sometimes flowed out of your reading of scripture. Um, in other words, a kind of precursor to the theological exegesis that you get in Richard Hayes and Stephen Chapman, etc., Ellen Davis. Um, and that she really, again, as Tier said, she keeps it about God, and I think she's just really convinced that if the resurrection is not true, then this is the silliest of conversations to be having about Jesus, and the Christian faith really has nothing to offer outside of that kind of Pauline focus on atonement and God doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And um, I've noticed, yeah, so,
Hmm.
and I think that's deeply Southern. It's one of the things I enjoyed about being bishop in Alabama. It was it was fun to be church around people who really believe they need saving, or people who believe they're damned if
And
Jesus Christ does not save sinners.
Now
And
it feels like everybody else. Everybody else needs to be saved. I'm good.
That's true. Yeah,
More
yeah, I'm
prescriptive
fine.
than
I'm doing fine.
descriptive.
But the Trump administration has just
Okay.
taken us, trying to take us to hell. Yeah, and the yeah, and Fleming quotes me in a couple of places, and the one thing she seems to like about what I said is God is active, God is alive, God speak. That she really wants to maintain God's agency in a
Yeah.
in a time when theology has really lost a sense of God's agency, much of it.
Yep.
yeah, I think
Yep.
in the same way that it's fun to be church around people who know they need saving, it's because Tony, you were making the distinction between the written sermon and the heard sermon. Um, One of the things that makes her preaching compelling, um, like listening to it, being in her presence, because she's not a demonstrative preacher. She's not a funny preacher. She's not photogenic preacher or whatever you want to call it. But it is clear and palpable that she believes that the word works through the preacher's words, and that her conviction alone makes her preaching compelling.
One interesting thing
Good.
is that she is not a fan or was not a fan of Tim Keller's preaching.
Her husband, no.
And
Her husband is, yeah.
Yeah, no, but it's interesting because I haven't read or heard a lot of his, but um, she seemed to understand him as kind of doing apologetics, and they had some similar appeal to people that were intellectual and thoughtful and that kind of thing. But she was, or she is, um, she wasn't. She doesn't have much use, I don't think. Will, what do you think for apologetics? She's more into proclamation.
Well, absolutely. I think
Yeah.
I've
And
just
she's
participated in a BART seminar Stephen Chapman did, and in looking for a sermon that was Bartian. They didn't look at any of mine. They looked at Fleming was there. The contrast with, I didn't know what she thought about Tim Keller. I knew she'd made some brief references to him, and but it is interesting, in Tim's sermons, they are substantial and they're correct and all, but it doesn't feel like God is doing much. And in Fleming's sermons, the sermon always ends with, okay, the Lord is going to have to do something. And by the way, the Lord has and is right now. And that sense of agency. But apologetics, yeah, they are not. I think she would be deeply suspicious of apologetics. Like I've talked about her being a genuine Anglican. She also has spent a lifetime rebelling against Anglicanism theologically, as I have experienced, and maybe I'm being unfair to Anglicanism, but she, has that suspicion of apologetics. And that's why I never liked that title, that book about between the Bible and the New York Times, because I just thought, check out her use of the New York Times and her sermons, which she does use from time to time. It's clear it ain't the New York Times standing in judgment on the Bible. It's the Bible explaining the New York Times to us. And just, yeah, so, yeah.
And yeah, she doesn't do apologetics. She has a comment about the resurrection she's made a few times, but and no one would confuse her sermons for talks, right? That Tim Keller's sermons were kind of like lectures. But yeah, he didn't proclaim in the same way, and there wasn't movement to the preached word in the way that Fleming.
And I think your sermons too, Will, and your sermons, they are proclamation. And when I listen to some evangelical sermons, there are always kind of 3 lessons we can get from Jesus here, or something like that. There isn't ever an explosion. It's not like something like, whoa, something bursts upon the scene that is new, that changes the moment. It's more, oh no, here just Jesus retreated and we need to retreat, and Jesus prayed a lot, so let's pray, and okay, go home now. It's just kind of, I find it's an odd thing, because I find her preaching more evangelical in the proper sense of the term than most evangelical preaching.
Oh Lord, yes.
And it's because of that moment. She really believes in revelation, and she really believes God is speaking. And it's not like everything's been done and we just need a few pointers, you know. And I was accusing liberals of that, but evangelicals do it too. It's kind of this.
They're all lettuce sermons.
They're all lettuce sermons. They're all
let us
yeah.
let us go forth.
Yeah. Good
the,
luck with that, you know. Yeah.
Will, one of the best sermons I have ever heard, and the best sermon I've heard from you, Will, was you preached at my church the Sunday after Donald Trump was elected in 2016.
It was a bold preaching selection for
At
that Sunday.
the early service. The text was like Romans 5 or something like that. It was definitely Romans. And Will started off with an illustration about lining people up good from bad on a continuum. And then the last third of the sermon was just this. It was just like a roller coaster going up a hill, right? It was just detail after detail after detail after detail of the sins and foibles of Donald Trump in his personal life, and it just kept ratcheting it up, and then Will paused and said something like, "You know, I guess that's exactly someone that Jesus died for," and then Will just walked out of the pulpit, and pissed a whole bunch of people off, and he changed the sermon for the next service. But
the only thing I remember is the man in the wheelchair who came up. I'm standing there with Jason at the door, and this man in a wheelchair rolls up and he says, "How dare you? Donald Trump is a good man." And I said, "Really? Well, I let's hope Jesus doesn't think so." And so yeah, and Jason said, "You know, leave him alone. He's crippled, for God to get you have to." And
but it was such an effective sermon because you know, one of the problems with evangelical preaching, Tony, isn't just it's law in the form of advice, but also everything's tied down, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the way that Will just ended and walked out of the pulpit, not trying to make sure that everybody got it, is a way of gesturing towards, like, if this sermon is going to work, God has to be doing something here.
Yeah, it was a rare moment for me, but I do think that phrase, "so everybody got it," theologically you could say, you know, that's kind of Jesus' job, you know.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
And so, and I remember Fleming, when she was at Duke, this earnest Episcopal student came up to her and said, I really had trouble understanding your point. And Fleming said something in that Southern graciousness and all, but something like, "Well, that's all right. That's because your understanding is not the point." You know, so the proclamation, and again, I searched in vain in her sermons for any moment where she says, "Now let us," or "you need to," or "I hope you've now learned, you're taking an important life lesson away from this sermon. You'll do a better job next week of trying to do this or that." And again, her book is on the atonement, and I just think she believes that Jesus Christ, what he has done and is doing as an expression of who he is, the cross, you know, that's just the most important thing we have to say. And that we get into some of our saddest sin because we believe there's something left for us to do, or that he is an example of something rather
And I
than
think
he
that
is.
I think that accounts for her, like the wide frame that she uses, right? That if you believe God is at work in the world, if you believe God's enemy is at work in the world, well, of course, she's going to grab big stories from the news to illustrate these themes. Right? I remember a sermon she preached at the National Cathedral where she used a long story about CIA torture at black sites after 9/11. But if you're, if you're looking for God's action in the world, if you're looking for the devil's movement in the world, it makes it less likely, right, that you're going to personalize and psychologize the faith.
Yeah, that add that to the list of personalization and oh Lord, the sermons that start out about, would you like to find deeper meaning in your life, your work life? Again, as a college chaplain, I remember the student I was it seemed to be having a tough time, and I said, I think it's important for you to focus. What is it that you need to happen here? What is it you most are looking for and want? Let me just ask you that. What is it that you most want? And he said, maybe sad to say, I'd like to get laid this weekend. And I said, okay,
Put that on the prayer
God
list.
God has sent you to me to punish me for all of my sermons. Thank you. Thank you for your candor. And this conversation is over now. God has appropriately chastised me through you. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, just leave. Let me deal with it. But I thought, apologetics always starts out with, what do you really, really want more than Jesus Christ? Oh, good. Let's talk about that and how Jesus can be helpful in helping you get what it is you think you got to have to get out of bed in the morning. Fleming doesn't play that game at all. She announces, we have a God who is with you, who has worked for you to do maybe what you didn't even know you needed doing, but which you're dying to have. And that's the gospel.
I spent a couple days last week in Minneapolis. Tony Jones and a small group of us have a Templeton grant to. So we've done like the largest survey of the nuns that's ever been done, and then we gathered 4 sociologists of religion to review the data with them, and it was so not surprising, but surprising that the categories that these sociologists want to use in talking about religion, in terms of it giving people a meaningful life, and well-being, all these like they didn't seem to understand that like those aren't really categories that like Christian preachers have, that whether Christianity is helpful for you personally or societally, it's kind of, it's ancillary to whether or not it's true.
The irony there that's a comment on our culture is it's not that Christianity doesn't prove to be helpful, but we're helpful when we're not trying to be instrumental.
Yeah.
When we actually believe this is the truth, and
that's a great, write that line down. That's a good one.
And we're so often, I mean, I see these articles all the time about people who go to church are less lonely and less likely to kill themselves and stuff like that, and so you should go to church. But that's only true if you're not focused on the instrumental part of it. If you're focused on this is it, this is the message, this is the story, this is what is happening, and then you kind of, maybe your life gets a little twist, and maybe it doesn't, but you don't set out to try to make people happier or to make them their lives more meaningful. That's a secondary benefit, if anything.
Yeah.
But
exactly we in America want to instrumentalize everything. Religion has to have its, it has to have some purpose that it's doing something for us.
Yeah, well, I was even trying to argue with these people that, like, it's like, the idea that your concern for your neighbor's well-being is a desire that you would not have had apart from Christianity. like,
Mhm.
so even these concerns you have for your neighbors are the creation of Christianity, whether you identify with that religion now or not. But yeah, it's
And even I learned at Duke Chapel, even concern for the neighbor uh, can be used for my sinfulness to think, I have my master's degree. I am actually a very intelligent, resourceful, powerful person. Uh, Therefore, I can fix my neighbor. I can, I just, it interests me in the present moment. I had friends who were very politically engaged in activism and all. I think the Trump administration has been so effective, it's so demolishing, so sweeping, so beyond critique in our system, thanks to the Democratic Party's uh, dissipation and all. Uh, I think maybe they have just learned, wow, I, uh, I, I voted, I contributed to the Democrat, I worked, wow, and I, I got for that I got Donald Trump. Wow, maybe I am not God. Maybe I can't make the world to turn out. And I do wonder. I've wondered back to Fleming. To me, most of her preaching has been done in affluent, highly educated congregations, and the pressures coming from an affluent, educated congregation to preach that the gospel is basically a way for good people, good, powerful people to be even more powerful and good. The fact that she has steadfastly resisted those pressures and, in fact, critiqued and ridiculed them in a number of sermons is just amazing because white people in power are flattered by sermons which say, you have the world in your hands. Now you're here to get better motivated, to be the person you want to be, and to take responsibility for your neighbors, and to make sure the next administration is democratic. Um, Fleming has never bought into that, and I think that's an amazing theological achievement.
and I think it's her. I think her theological convictions around the agency of God and the primacy of sin, um, the living Word of God. She's commented frequently that she's gotten more of an audience and a welcome in Reformed and Methodist churches than she has in her own Episcopal churches.
Mhm.
And I wonder if that has something to do with what you're saying there, Will.
Envy is a terrible sin too. But I'm surprised. I was grateful to hear you say Methodist because, I can think a lot of reasons Methodists shouldn't like Fleming. Reformed. She's more reformed than most reformed. And yeah, yeah.
I think
Well,
one of the other
I think it's also a reminder that we preachers are just frighteningly dependent on models and the great company of preachers, and
Mhm.
that I can remember I can remember a sermon in Duke Chapel in which I watched Fleming. I don't know if this was her intention or not, but I watched her just sort of lure in the congregation about, hey, I'm quoting from the New Yorker. Had a fascinating article. I know that all of you have read it, kind of thing,
Uh-huh.
and all, and And I sat up in the chancel looking at my congregation with complete contempt. And I thought, you dummies, she is getting ready to smack you. Please. And here you are just wandering into her clutches undefended. And all right, okay. And she just said, you know, I'm concerned, and I know that many of you are concerned. And I said, oh, they eat that shit up. They're coming, you know. She's got them, and she's ready. And then she slaps back with Paul, as I recall, and saying, uh, you know, wow, even if some of our best motivations are also some of our most perverted attempts to avoid being saved by a gracious God. Anyway, by the end of the sermon, it was like, hey, get the lady off of us, you know, let her go back to wherever she came from.
So I have to ask. So of the four of us, I believe I'm the only one on the call who has not met Fleming in real life.
Oh,
I've met Fleming through her writing. I've interviewed her countless times about preaching and well, preaching.
huh.
So is she in real life? I guess my question is, what I'm reading on the page, is that what I'm getting in real life too? Because I'm
Yeah.
assuming most of our listeners haven't.
Yep. Yep. She's very dignified, and she has that thing you Southerners have, Will, where you can, you know, it sounds polite, but you just got you cut off at the knees. I mean, she she's very mannered, but very, you know, like basically, oh, did she just tell me I'm an idiot?
Yeah.
But she did it nicely. Yeah, I think that's what happened.
That's
She
one time
she
some
she
preacher said to Stanley and I were there, and he said, Stanley, uh, you know, we so much that you say is so good, but it says when Will says what you say, it we can understand it, we can hear it. He says it in a way that is more gracious and receptive than the way you turn off a lot of people when you say it. And Stanley said, that just shows how stupid you are. You're a Yankee and you have never been the victim of the Southern con. He said, there's Williman just ingratiating himself to you. He is picking your pockets. He is in bed with your daughter, and you thank him for it. And you just say, isn't he so charming? That just shows how dumb you are. But I do, again, I wonder, Fleming grew up in that time when women got power by understanding men and understanding people well, and by ingratiating themselves with them. And you can look at so many of her sermons start out graciously and kind of luring people in, but she's also aware that at some point she's got to pull out the gospel. And the gospel is going to come as a jolt to a lot of the people, but she does that beautifully and well. I told her one time she reminded me of like Luke, like Luke's gospel and Acts, where Luke will start out his gospel saying, this was during the reign of Quirinius and Caesar and all these important. And I'm just going to do history with you. We're just going to do history, okay? And then very quickly, you got Mary and Joseph, and suddenly we're not in history. We're not in history as we do history anymore. And you've been lured into, I'm just going to tell you some ancient stuff, and suddenly today becomes important. Well, she's been a wonderful model for us, and so
I just one other point I'd want to make that I don't think we've hit yet, but you might have before I joined, was her emphasis on the three agencies.
Mhm.
And that so you mentioned the devil earlier, either Will or Jason, and she, you know, she's not uh, wedded to the idea of devil behind every bush or anything, but she does think there's a battle going on.
Mhm.
And she does think that when Jesus is, you know, healing people, he's encountering uh, the powers of sin and death, and when he's exercising people. And I just think that's such an important variation from at least what I was raised in, where there were really just two agencies on the on the you know, on the stage, which was God, sort of distant, and mostly us.
Mhm.
And it was, we just had to kind of, you know, do better. But there wasn't much acknowledgement of wow, there really is something amiss in us, and there's
Mhm.
something working on us, uh, that is trying to get a hold of us, and it's doing a pretty darn good job. And so she uses language that has been largely excised from the liberal mainline Protestant world about battle,
Mhm.
struggle, uh, you know, the soldiers of the cross, put on the armor of God, all that kind of stuff, at least in my world, has kind of been disposed of, you know, as if by getting rid of it, we would get rid of any real evil. You know, we just do a language
Hmm.
exorcism, and
Yeah,
that'll do
well,
it.
yeah, and like it's and related to that too. She kind of unabashedly claims the language of substitution that
Oh, yeah.
a lot of seminary trained people
Yeah.
think is
She,
antiquated.
yeah, in her book, she does, to me, one of the most effective, not defense, but renditions of the substitutionary atonement and Psalm that I can really resonate with. But the book is Tony's comment. It's Christus Victor
Mhm.
atonement and the struggle, and it's real and it is personal. There's a personality. It's organized. It's uh, I do think maybe though, and this is kind of Bart, but she can afford to give so much credence to the possibility of Satan and the satanic because she has such a strong, vibrant Christology. And it's kind of Bart who suggested to me that um, we you talk about Satan can be kind of perverted and dangerous
Mhm.
if you don't begin from the victory in Jesus Christ. Then you could admit to he has really worked a difficult victory, and it's so maybe her ability to talk about Satan is a kind of testimony to the vibrancy of her Christology and her sense that the work has been done, people,
Yeah.
and it's my job to announce it.
Mhm.
Uh, that's my good news for you here.
Yeah. That's a good contextual qualification there. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys for your time.
Thank you
Hey, good luck.
for convening the conversation.
Okay.
And we'll see
Tony,
you
Good to see you.
later.